In the summer of 1942, Adolf Hitler believed that the war in the East could still be won. Operation Barbarossa had failed to destroy the Soviet Union, but Germany was not yet defeated. The Wehrmacht still occupied enormous territories. Millions of Soviet soldiers had been killed or captured. Entire regions lay in ruins. To Hitler, it was not the end, only a delay. Germany needed a decisive victory, not next year, not later, now. And this time, the objective was not Moscow. It was oil. Fuel was the lifeblood of the German war machine. Without it, tanks stopped. Aircraft stayed grounded. Armies became powerless. Hitler knew that control of the Caucasus oil fields could decide the entire war. Standing between Germany and those oil fields was a city on the Volga River, Stalingrad. Strategically, the city controlled a vital supply route. Barges carrying grain, fuel, and soldiers moved along the Volga day and night. Cutting this artery would cripple Soviet logistics. But Stalingrad was more than a strategic target. It carried Joseph Stalin's name. For Hitler, capturing Stalingrad became personal. It was a matter of prestige, ideology, and pride. He believed that its fall would shatter Soviet morale and force Stalin into submission. What Hitler failed to understand was that pride was now replacing strategy. In June 1942, Germany launched Operation Blue. Unlike Barbarossa, this offensive focused almost entirely on the southern front. Army Group South advanced in two massive thrusts, one aimed toward the Caucasus oil fields. The other pointed directly at Stalingrad. The German 6th Army, commanded by General Friedrich Paulus, led the attack on the city. At first, everything seemed to go according to plan. The Soviet defenses were weak and disorganized. Entire formations were overrun. Red Army units were encircled and destroyed. German tanks advanced rapidly across the open steppe. Hitler once again believed victory was inevitable. By August 1942, German forces reached the outskirts of Stalingrad. The Volga River lay before them. The city itself stretched along the riverbank, long, narrow, and exposed. On August 23rd, the Luftwaffe struck with devastating force. Thousands of bombs rained down on Stalingrad in a single day. Residential districts disappeared under firestorms. Factories burned. Streets became rivers of flames. Tens of thousands of civilians were killed. Survivors fled into basements, sewers, and tunnels. By the end of the bombing, Stalingrad was no longer a city. It was a shattered skeleton of concrete and steel. Ironically, this destruction turned into the city's greatest defense. German commanders had trained for maneuver warfare. Rapid advances, pincer movements, encirclements. But Stalingrad offered none of that. The ruins eliminated visibility. Tanks could not maneuver. Artillery had limited effect. What awaited the 6th Army was something entirely different. Urban warfare at its most brutal. The Germans called it Rattenkrieg, rat war. Fighting was no longer about territory. It was about survival. Each factory hall, staircase, and cellar became a battlefield. A single building could be captured and recaptured multiple times in a single day. Soldiers fought at point-blank range. Grenades exploded in closed rooms. Bayonets were used in the dark. Rifles overheated from constant firing. The Red Army adapted quickly. Soviet soldiers stayed as close as possible to German positions. This tactic, known as hugging the enemy, neutralized German artillery and air support. Any bombardment risked killing their own men. Snipers became a constant threat. They operated from ruins, from broken chimneys, from holes in factory walls. German soldiers learned to fear every shadow. One sniper in particular became legendary, Vasily Zaitsev. His kills spread panic far beyond their actual number. German soldiers believed death was watching them from every corner. Whether exaggerated or not, the psychological impact was immense. While battles raged inside the city, the Volga River became the Soviet lifeline. Under constant enemy fire, boats transported reinforcements across the river at night. Many never reached the far shore. Barges sank. Soldiers drowned in icy water. Artillery shells shattered wooden hulls. But still they came. Fresh troops replaced the fallen. Wounded men were ferried back. Ammunition and supplies crossed under fire. Stalingrad did not starve. Germany did. The Soviet command understood something crucial. Time was on their side. Germany, despite its victories, was slowly bleeding. Every destroyed tank, every dead veteran, every exhausted supply line weakened the Wehrmacht. The Soviet Union, with its vast manpower and industrial capacity, could absorb losses Germany could not. Orders from Moscow were uncompromising, not one step back. Retreat was forbidden. Blocking units stood behind Soviet lines to enforce discipline. Desertion meant death. The city must be held at any cost. By October 1942, German forces controlled nearly 90% of Stalingrad. Only a thin strip along the Volga remained in Soviet hands. Hitler proclaimed that victory was imminent. German newspapers celebrated. But the reality at the front was grim. The Sixth Army was exhausted. Units were under strength. Ammunition was rationed. Food supplies were irregular. Casualties mounted with no relief in sight. Most dangerously of all, the German flanks were held by Allied troops, Romanian, Hungarian, and Italian units. They were brave but poorly equipped and inadequately supported against Soviet armor. Soviet high command had noticed. And they were preparing something far larger than city fighting. In the freezing dawn of November 19, 1942, the Red Army struck back. The Soviet counteroffensive did not begin inside the destroyed city. It came from the open steppes beyond it. In the early hours of November 19, 1942, the frozen ground shook as thousands of Soviet artillery guns opened fire along the German flanks. For weeks, the Red Army had quietly accumulated men, tanks, and ammunition, while the Germans focused entirely on fighting inside Stalingrad itself. The blow fell where the Germans were weakest. Romanian units guarding the northern flank were hit first. They had little anti-tank equipment and almost no reserves. When waves of Soviet armor surged forward through snow and smoke, resistance collapsed within hours. Defensive positions disintegrated, communications failed, entire units were overrun or scattered. The southern flank suffered the same fate. Soviet tank corps advanced at incredible speed, bypassing strong points and driving deep into German rear areas. Airfields, supply depots, and headquarters were captured or destroyed before the Germans could react. Roads became clogged with retreating troops, broken vehicles, and panicked columns moving in every direction. Within days, Soviet pincers closed behind the German Sixth Army. On November 23rd, the encirclement was complete. More than 250,000 German and Axis soldiers were trapped inside Stalingrad. For the first time in the war, a full German field army was surrounded with no immediate hope of relief. General Friedrich Paulus understood the danger immediately. His staff warned that remaining in the city meant slow destruction. German units still possessed combat power. A breakout attempt toward the southwest, while costly, could still be possible. Paulus requested permission to act. The answer from Hitler was refusal. Stalingrad was to be held at all costs. The Sixth Army would not retreat. Supplies would be delivered by air. This decision condemned tens of thousands of men. The Luftwaffe faced an impossible task. To sustain the encircled army, several hundred tons of supplies were needed every single day. In reality, barely a fraction arrived. Transport aircraft were shot down by Soviet fighters or ground fire. Others crashed trying to land on frozen airstrips under artillery attack. Winter worsened everything. Fog, blizzards, and extreme cold grounded aircraft for days at a time. Fuel shortages limited flights even further. The airlift that Hitler promised existed mostly on paper. Inside the pocket, conditions deteriorated rapidly. Food rations were cut again and again until starvation became widespread. Ammunition shortages forced soldiers to conserve fire. Medical supplies ran out completely. Wounded men lay untreated in cellars, their injuries infected, their bodies slowly freezing. Temperatures dropped below -30 degrees Celsius. Engines refused to start. Machine guns jammed. Frostbite claimed fingers, toes, and lives. Soldiers wrapped themselves in rags, newspapers, anything that might offer insulation. Horses were slaughtered for meat. Leather equipment was boiled into thin soup. Combat continued despite everything. Soviet forces applied constant pressure, attacking isolated German positions again and again. Each assault reduced the pocket further. German units were separated, cut off from one another, unable to coordinate defense. Paulus remained trapped between obedience and reality. Communications with Berlin grew increasingly detached from the situation on the ground. Hitler spoke of perseverance and honor. He promised relief operations that lacked strength or coordination to succeed. In January 1943, the Red Army launched its final assault. Massive artillery barrages pulverized remaining German defenses. Soviet troops pushed forward relentlessly, street by street, ruin by ruin. The encircled Sixth Army was split into separate pockets, each fighting alone. At this stage, collapse was inevitable. On January 30th, Paulus was promoted to Field Marshal. The message could not have been clearer. No German field marshal had ever surrendered. Hitler expected Paulus to die in Stalingrad. But Paulus chose another path. With his army shattered, his men starving and freezing, and all hope gone, resistance no longer served any military purpose. On February 2, 1943, the surviving German forces laid down their weapons. The Battle of Stalingrad was over. The scale of the disaster shocked the world. More than 90,000 German soldiers went into captivity. Entire divisions had been wiped out. Of those captured, only a few thousand would ever return home. The Sixth Army had ceased to exist. Germany had suffered the greatest defeat in its military history. The psychological impact was profound. Across Europe, the aura of German invincibility was shattered. Allied morale surged. Within the Soviet Union, Stalingrad became a symbol of sacrifice, endurance, and ultimate victory. From this moment forward, the war in the East changed direction. The Red Army seized the initiative and would never relinquish it. Step by step, year by year, it would push westward, driving the Wehrmacht back across the continent. Stalingrad was not simply a battle. It was the moment the tide of World War II turned. The road that began in the ruins along the Volga would end only in Berlin. As the fighting inside the pocket slowed, a different battle began. It was no longer a battle of weapons, but of endurance, psychology, and survival. For many German soldiers, the realization came slowly. At first, they still believed relief was possible. Rumors spread of powerful German formations advancing to save them. Radio messages from Berlin spoke of sacrifice, honor, and perseverance. But day after day, nothing changed. The airlift failed. Food disappeared. Hope followed. The collapse of morale was gradual but irreversible. Men who had marched confidently across Europe now sat silently in frozen ruins, staring at empty space. Discipline weakened. Orders were followed mechanically without belief. The sense of purpose that had carried the German army through earlier campaigns was gone. Some soldiers wrote final letters home. Others stopped writing altogether. Faith in leadership vanished. By January 1943, reality could no longer be denied. The Sixth Army was dying, not fighting. Entire units existed only on paper. Command structures broke down as officers fell ill, froze, or were killed. Medical conditions were beyond catastrophic. Field hospitals overflowed. There were no anesthetics, no bandages, no medicine. Surgeons performed amputations with frozen tools. Many wounded were simply left where they lay, because there was nothing that could be done. Typhus and dysentery spread rapidly. Starvation weakened immune systems. Soldiers lacked the strength even to bury the dead. Bodies froze where they fell, becoming part of the ruined landscape. German propaganda continued to speak of heroism, but for those inside Stalingrad, such words had lost all meaning. The final days were marked by silence. Artillery fire decreased. Ammunition was nearly gone. Small groups of soldiers defended collapsed buildings with a few remaining rifles. Resistance existed, but it was fragmented and hopeless. Paulus understood that the battle was finished long before the official surrender. His promotion to field marshal changed nothing. It was meant as a signal, but to Paulus it felt like an insult. He would not sacrifice thousands more lives for symbolism. On February 2nd, the chaos ended. German units began surrendering in small groups. Soldiers emerged from ruins with hands raised, many too weak to stand. Soviet troops looked on in disbelief at the condition of their enemies. What they saw was not an army. It was the remnants of one. More than 90,000 German soldiers were taken prisoner. Among them were generals, officers, and veterans of earlier victorious campaigns. They had expected death. Few believed they would survive captivity. Their fears were justified. The journey into captivity was brutal. Exhausted prisoners were marched through snow without food or shelter. Many died within days. Others perished in overcrowded camps due to disease, malnutrition, and exposure. Only a fraction would ever return to Germany. At home, the reaction was shock. The German public had been told that Stalingrad was nearly won. The announcement of surrender shattered confidence in the regime. For the first time, Nazi propaganda could not hide the scale of the disaster. Joseph Goebbels spoke of total war. Germany would now fight for survival. For the Soviet Union, Stalingrad became a defining moment. It was not just a military victory, but a moral one. The Red Army had endured unimaginable losses, yet had emerged victorious against the strongest army in Europe. The psychological balance of the war shifted irreversibly. From Stalingrad onward, the Soviet command grew more confident. Lessons were learned. Industrial production surged. Command structure improved. Soldiers believed they could win. And they did not stop. The momentum gained at Stalingrad would carry into the destruction of German positions at Kursk, the liberation of Eastern Europe, and ultimately the assault on Berlin itself. Stalingrad changed the nature of the war. Before it, Germany advanced. After it, Germany retreated. Before it, Nazi invincibility was believed. After it, it was broken. The city on the Volga became a warning to all who underestimated endurance, scale, and human will. Stalingrad proved that modern war was not decided solely by speed or technology, but by resilience, logistics, and the ability to endure catastrophe without collapse. It was the moment when the Second World War turned decisively against Nazi Germany. And when the ruins finally fell silent, one truth was clear. From Stalingrad, there was no return.